I'd like to start off by thanking Kathy M, Drew, our DCMC, and the rest of the Area 07, California Northern Interior, District 33, panel members, raise your hand, panel members, for asking me to come up here and share with you guys this evening. I've been asked to share with you guys this evening on a topic that is obviously very important to all of you. It's also a topic that has been dear to my heart for many, many years. And it's a topic that I've had some really good teachers help me learn about and help me carry the message through our history. And the topic I'm going to be talking on this evening is the history of Alcoholics Anonymous in the Big Book. And because this is a topic workshop meeting, if you will, I felt like I had license to take some notes. So I wrote some things down. I'll be referring to my notes. I'll also be reading a few things to us this evening that are of interest. And I'm sure there's some of you that are already saying to yourself, Don, go home and read that stuff. Just tell us the story, buddy. But I'm going to read it anyway, guys. What I'm going to be sharing on this evening, guys, is I'm going to be sharing a little bit about recovery from alcoholism, which there was some, believe it or not, prior to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to be talking about the pre-AA days, the early AA days, the pre-Big Book days, whose idea the Big Book was. It wasn't Bill, it was Hank P's, Hank Parker's. How the writing of the Big Book went, and a little bit about what happened after that. So it will be what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, but it'll be about Alcoholics Anonymous and the Big Book. I find it to be a little bit difficult to come up here and talk about the history of recovery from alcoholism without talking first a little bit about the history of alcohol and the history of the consumption of alcohol. And my research is that the history of the consumption of alcohol dates back to the clay tablets of the Babylonians. These tribes, when they would plant their crops in season, if they had a good year, they'd harvest their crop and they'd take their harvest and they'd ferment their crop and they'd make booze and they'd throw big parties and feasts and get drunk and go raid the other tribes' camps and cause fights and wars and steal their women and bring them back. Anybody identify with that? That's back when we were writing in stone, guys. I think we've been drinking a long time. In the Bible, there's the story of Noah. And if you read the story, I guess that God was upset with humans. He was going to cause a huge flood. And the story goes that he had Noah build a huge boat, huge ship. And the story goes that he put two each of his favorite animals on that boat. The floods came and they went away. You read the story. The very first thing that Noah did when he got off that boat was he planted grapes. My kind of drunk. I think he planted grapes, got drunk, and barbecued the animals. That's pretty much what I would have done, guys. What I'm going to be talking about, guys, what I'm going to be doing for us at this workshop this evening, and again on the fourth Monday in July, is I'm going to be recreating the links in the chain that created Alcoholics Anonymous and gave every one of us in the room this evening a place to come to recover from our own alcoholism and our own seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And after having done the research that I've done, collecting archives, studying the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's become very apparent to me, guys, that every link in that chain, up to and including every seat in this room this evening and on the Zoom call, the chain of recovery is a miracle. And I was listening to a friend of mine share several years back, actually a late friend of mine share several years back. We were both at the same conference at the same time. Guy out of North Carolina by the name of Tom Iverson. And Tom was talking about miracles, and I'm a guy that likes definitions. I like things defined. And Tom gave for me probably the best definition of a miracle that I've ever heard. What Tom said was a miracle is nothing more than what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And the two have to be divinely introduced, but the miracle happens when preparation meets opportunity. Now, I've heard many of our stories in this room because I'm at home, and I'm blessed to be at home with this story this time, guys. And I would venture to say that every one of us, man, when we got here, we were prepared. We were at a bottom beyond imagination. Preparation met opportunity. The two were divinely introduced. The miracle happened, and we're sober today. And a lot of miracles had to happen in order for us to all be sitting here this evening. The history of Alcoholics Anonymous is very well chronicled, guys. The book Pass It On is about Bill Wilson and his story and his writings. The book Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers is about Dr. Bob and the early Akron members. The book AA Comes of Age is a great history book on Alcoholics Anonymous. I think that AA Comes of Age should be required reading for every newcomer coming into Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things that I was told early on was, Don, if you're thoroughly convinced that your life depends on Alcoholics Anonymous, then you should try to learn as much about it as you possibly can. And what I'm going to be doing in this workshop and the one on the fourth Monday in July, I'm not going to be talking so much about what's in those history books, but I'm going to be talking more about the links in the chain of recovery. Anyway, we'll get this thing started. Back in the 1840s, the early 1840s, there were 6 drunks. And these 6 drunks were sitting around a bar in Baltimore, Maryland, and the name of the bar was the Washington Inn in Baltimore, Maryland. The Washington Inn in Baltimore, Maryland. And these 6 drunks decided one day that they were going to swear off alcohol. They also agreed to get a higher power. And they did this, and one of the first things that these 6 drunks realized, or discovered, if you will, one of the first things that came about in the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the first things that these 6 drunks realized was that they could stay sober together, but that they couldn't stay sober alone. And these 6 drunks did this. This was in the early 1840s. And within 10 years, depending upon which news article you read from the time, this group grew to number 500,000 people. That was 500,000 people here in the United States staying sober together. And I want to read something to you. It's a short read out of this book right here. The name of the book is 6 Nights with the Washingtonians. It was written by T.S. Arthur. There's no printing date in this book. It's been estimated that the book was written in the mid-1840s. Just a little quick history, personal history about this book. This book was given to me. This book was given to me by a lady that has been a very strong advocate for working with others and carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, a lady out of Concord, California named Debbie D. And Debbie D gave me this book many years ago. And if you happen to be coming to our Unity Day, which I believe is coming up in September, on September 14th, you will get a chance to meet Debbie D and hear her share her experience, strength, and hope, and carry the message about Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, so if you weren't planning on going to the Unity Day, you should be planning on going to Unity Day, not so much for the food, but more for the carrying the message and fellowship with you guys. So anyway, I can't remember everything that Debbie said to me when she gave me this book, but I do remember her saying, Don, there's no doubt in my mind that you'll probably read this entire book. And I'm not going to read the whole book to you this evening. We would only have a couple minutes left of our meeting if I did. but I am gonna read this, and it's about the Washingtonians, guys. It says this: "Come," said a friend one evening in the winter of 1841, "let us look in upon the Washingtonians." "The Washingtonians," I replied, "and pray who and what are they? Have you not heard about them? No? Then you are ignorant of one of the most remarkable facts in the history of the times. Explain yourself." "With pleasure. About 9 months ago, perhaps not quite so long, there were assembled in a drinking house in this city, Baltimore, 6 men, well advanced in years, who had for a long time been confirmed drunkards, or at least so wedded to the love of strong drink as to found it almost impossible to live without a daily resort to its stimulating influences. They had met accidentally, or rather without any other design in repairing to the barroom than that which had taken them there 100 times. But in the mind of each, there was a feeling of sorrow for his enslaved and wretched condition, a strong desire to rise out of it, yet a painful, hopeless sense of weakness. How often, alas, how often had each made resolutions of reform? How often had each renounced the cup of confusion, only to sink again in the bewildering draught and to sink still lower in the scale of human degradation? Thus they met, as they had often met before, but neither seemed inclined to call for the subtle poison that had so many times stolen away their reason. Soon the feelings of each became known to the others, and they felt a sudden hope springing up in their minds, a hope in the power of association. Sad experience had proved to each one of that little company that alone he could not stand, but together, shoulder to shoulder, hand to hand, and heart to heart, they felt that though the struggle would be hard, they could and they would conquer. And that's the Washingtonians. And the Washingtonians had no roots. The Washingtonians had no traditions. The Washingtonians, and one of the bases for our traditions in Alcoholics Anonymous is that we've learned from other people's mistakes. And the Washingtonians had no rules, and money, property, prestige, and power started to interfere, and within a short period of time, Washingtonians had failed. And some of the reasons that the Washingtonians failed were they started getting involved in other people's business. They started taking positions on different political issues at the time. One of the political issues that they took a position on was alcohol reform. And the one that caused the factions to collapse was they took a position on slavery, and this divided the group, and the Washingtonians had failed. Now, keep in mind that the Washingtonians were very similar society to Alcoholics Anonymous in that they started out with a singleness of purpose. They also had the Martha Washington Society, which was very similar to Al-Anon. I'm going to go now to the year 1895. 1895 is the year that Bill Wilson was born, so we're just prior to Bill's birth. In 1895, there was a fellow by the name, and I'm going to hand out a quiz. I forgot to tell you guys this. In the first essay, 20 questions. You guys are all used to 20 questions. I'm going to hand out a quiz at the end of the season, so try to remember some of these names. Right? There was a fellow by the name of Sam Hadley. And Sam Hadley had gotten sober through a profound religious conversion experience, and it was notable. It was very notable. Now, in 1895, we didn't have the means of public media that we have today. We didn't have radio. We didn't have television. Newspapers were quite sparse in 1895. Certainly, there was no internet, so there was no social media. You weren't going to like Sam Hadley on Facebook or follow Sam Hadley on Instagram or on TikTok. But I think that we can assume safely that if this was happening in one place in the United States, it was probably happening in others as well. And Sam Hadley got sober through this profound religious conversion experience that was very notable. And he was staying sober in a mission. And the name of the mission was Jerry McCauley's Mission. He was staying sober with 35 other people. And there was a young, brilliant psychiatrist back then by the name of William James. William James. And William James was writing a book about different types of conversion experience, and he wanted to write about an alcoholic. And so he wrote about Sam Hadley's profound religious conversion experience in this book right here, The Varieties of Religious Experience, written by William James and published in 1902. This book happens to be the book, not this particular book, but this book happens to be the book that Bill Wilson read when he was in Towns Hospital, when he had what he called his white flash experience. And in this book, William James wanted to write about an alcoholic, and so he wrote about Sam Hadley's profound religious conversion experience in this book. Now, Sam Hadley also had a son, and his son's name was Harrison Hadley. And what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to ask you to log that name for just a couple of minutes. I'll tie Harrison Hadley into the links of the chain here in just a few minutes. In 1927, I'm going to flash forward now to about 1927. Bill Wilson is in the throes of his alcoholism. He's still successful at this point. He's starting to lose things. He's going to detox. Alcohol is becoming a major problem in Bill's life. And in 1927, Harrison Hadley, who I had to log that name, he'd grown up just like his dad. He was a chronic alcoholic, couldn't get sober, but he knew that his dad had gotten sober in a mission. And he began to think that if he could get to a mission, he could get sober and stay sober as well. And in 1927, over in China, and I'm sure some of you will start recognizing some of these names as I start talking about them, but in 1927, over in China, there was a brilliant young minister by the name of Frank Buckman. And Frank Buckman had these great new ideas on Christianity and moral rearmament and different things. And while he was over in China, he met up with a brilliant American young minister by the name of Sam Shoemaker. Sam Shoemaker. And Frank Buckman convinced Sam Shoemaker of this message that he was trying to get across on Christianity and moral rearmament and different things. And those two guys established what was to become the Oxford Group. And Sam Shoemaker came back here to the United States, and he was installed as the director of the Oxford Group east of the Mississippi River. Now, I say east of the Mississippi River. There wasn't much out west of the Mississippi River in 1927. But Sam Hadley's son, Harrison Hadley, who'd grown up just like his dad, chronic alcoholic, couldn't get sober, began to think that if he could get to a mission, he could get sober and stay sober as well. And Harrison Hadley had heard of Frank Buckman, and he had heard of Sam Shoemaker, he'd heard of the Oxford Group, and what he did was he went and met with those two guys. And what he told them was, he said, you guys own an old mission down in the Bowery of New York. It's old, it's dilapidated, it's run down. How about if I go in there with a group of my people, clean this place up, make it usable, and under the direction of the Oxford Group, we'll get and stay sober. Frank Buckman and Sam Shoemaker told Harrison Hadley that would be fun. So Harrison goes down, and a group of his people, they go down to the Bowery of New York, and they clean up this old dilapidated, rundown mission, and they bring it back to life, and they make it usable. And under the direction of the Oxford Group, they open the Calvary Mission. Now, the Calvary Mission becomes very important to us in Alcoholics Anonymous. The Calvary Mission is where Bill Wilson went to his first Oxford Group meetings. The Calvary Mission is also one of the places that Bill went to drag drunks out of to try to get them sober. So I'm going to stop right here because I want everybody to pass the quiz. I'm going to recap this thing for you guys so nobody gets lost. So far, what we have, guys, is we have the Washingtonians. From the Washingtonians, the message went to Sam Hadley. From Sam Hadley, it went to William James, the psychiatrist who wrote the book. It went to Frank Buckman and Sam Shoemaker in the Oxford Group. It went to Harrison Hadley, and now down to the Bowery in New York to the Calvary Mission. We're still in the late 1920s. There was a young, rich drunk here in America. The guy was very wealthy. He was a drunk, a guy by the name of Roland Hazard. And Roland had done everything that a man could do to try to get sober and stay sober on his own. He was very wealthy. He was the heir to the Allied Chemical Corporation, huge corporation back then. But Roland could not get sober. So his dad one day decides that he's going to send Roland over to Europe, Zurich actually, to spend a year with the most renowned psychiatrist that we had in the world at that time. At that time, we had Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And so Roland's dad sends him over to spend a year with Carl Jung. And Roland learned all of this stuff. Man, he learned everything that you could learn about the behavior of the alcoholic, the thinking of the alcoholic, the psychiatry of the alcoholic. He learned all this stuff. And he had it licked this time. And so Roland, he got back on the boat, come back here to America. Not sure if it was on the boat, but right shortly thereafter, Roland got drunk again. And he couldn't get sober. So his dad sends him back over to Carl Jung. And Carl Jung told him this time, this was the first time that this was said. The next time it was said would be from Dr. Silkworth and Bill and Lois Wilson. But Carl Jung told him, he said, with all my degrees and all my information and everything I know about psychiatry, I cannot help you, Roland. You are beyond human aid. He said, no human power can relieve your alcoholism. But he told him, he said, Roland, that doesn't mean that you can't be helped. That doesn't mean that you're hopeless. There has been rare instances of profound religious conversion experience. You may be one of those that can do that. Carol just sent me that story. But you may be one of those that can do that. And so Roland, he got back on the boat, and he came back here to America. And Roland Hazard had heard of Frank Buckman and Sam Shoemaker and the Oxford group. And he had heard of Harrison Hadley and the Calvary Mission. And what Roland did was he went there. He went to the Calvary Mission down in the Bowery of New York, and he got sober there. And Roland remained sober. And one of the first things that Roland realized or discovered, if you will, another thing that came about in the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous, but one of the things that Roland realized was that he had to pass this thing on. He had to be carrying the message. He had to be working with others. And what Roland did was, Roland Hazard summered in Vermont. Now, Vermont, a lot of your affluent people out of New York have summer homes in Vermont. Now, Vermont is a very interesting place. For lack of a better way of putting it, Vermont is very important to us in Alcoholics Anonymous. Vermont is where the early links in the chain that created Alcoholics Anonymous started to become connected. Vermont is also where Bill Wilson was born. Vermont is where Dr. Bob was born. Now, keep in mind that Vermont is not known for anything other than there's more cows than there are people in Vermont, but Vermont is also where Roland Hazard summered. And what Roland Hazard did was, we're in the summer of 1934. Roland goes up to Vermont to spend the summer. He gets up there in Vermont, and he's got to find somebody to carry the message to and to work with and to try to help get sober. And so he goes out and he finds himself two guys. These two guys' names are Siebert Graves and Shep Cornell. Siebert Graves and Shep Cornell. Now, there's another fellow that spent in the summer of 1934 up in Vermont. And I'm sure many of you have either read his story or heard his story. This guy's name is Ebby Thatcher. Ebby Thatcher. And what took Ebby Thatcher up to Vermont in the summer of 1934? I love Ebby. I love his story. I can identify with the way he thinks. But Ebby Thatcher is the man that Bill Wilson credited for being his sponsor up until the day that he died. So Ebby is the guy that carried the message to Bill. But what took Ebby up to Vermont was he had all kinds of trouble with alcohol. Ebby was either always in court, or he was being arrested, or he was in jail, or he was in an institution. He had all kinds of trouble with alcohol. And a judge had pronounced Ebby as insane. He's insane. And the judge had told Ebby, he said, Ebby, one more beer, and I'm going to commit you to the state mental institution for an undetermined amount of time. So if that's not a reason to give up the booze, I don't know what is. But Ebby's family had sent him up to Vermont in the summer of 1934 to get the summer home ready for the family to come up. And again, I love Ebby. I can identify with this thinking. The story kind of goes like this. He's in this great big house up in Vermont, and it's warm. It's summertime. And he goes down in the basement of this great big house, and he sees this case of unopened beer. In his alcoholic mind, he sits there and he looks at the beer, and he looks at the beer. And his alcoholic mind told him, this is a dangerous thing. It's warm up here in Vermont. And if this beer sits here and ferments, and if those kids that are coming up here happen to be running around and playing in this basement, and if this beer sits here and ferments to the point that it could explode, someone could get hurt. So what was an alcoholic to do? You could not dump the beer. So Ebby drank the beer, he got drunk, he got in his car. I'm sure many of us can identify with that. He got in his car and he drove directly in through the front window of the neighbor lady's house, and she was standing there all freaked out. He rolled out of his car and asked her if she had a coffee. That's Ebby Thatcher. And Ebby continued to drink for just a short period of time. After that, he finally got arrested again. He was out hunting streetlights is what he was doing. He got arrested for shooting off a firearm in city limits. So here he is in court again. And if you read the history books, there were 3 people that showed up with Ebby Thatcher in court that morning. A lot of people say the court orders knew that Alcoholics Anonymous. Court orders were going around before Alcoholics Anonymous. The guy that was to become Bill's sponsor was court ordered to Alcoholics Anonymous. Basically, there was no AA at the time. But if you read the history books, what's documented is there was 3 people that showed up with Ebby Thatcher in court that morning. Roland Hazard, Siebert Graves, and Shep Cornell. And the judge looked down at Ebby and he said, Ebby, I told you if you ever showed up in my courtroom again, I was going to commit you to the state mental institution for an undetermined amount of time. He said, but there's a man in this courtroom this morning that I've been trying to get sober for his entire adult life, and I've had no success. But that man is sober today. I have no idea how it's happened or what has happened. The judge was the father. He said, that man is my son. The judge was the father of Siebert Graves, who Roland Hazard had gotten sober. And so the judge looked down at Ebby. Give you goosebumps for that. It's a miracle. These are the miracles. It really is. I try to not get, try not to take the tag. But anyway, these are the miracles, guys. So anyway, the judge looked down at Ebby and he said, I sent you to go with that man, which was Roland Hazard. He said, I sent you to go where he goes and do what he tells you to do, and I'll withhold sentencing to the state mental institution. So I'm going to stop again right now, guys, and I want to recap this thing again for us this evening, so nobody gets lost. So far, what we have the Washingtonians. From the Washingtonians, the message went to Sam Hadley. From Sam Hadley, it went to William James, the psychiatrist who wrote the book. It went to Frank Buckley and Sam Shoemaker in the Oxford group. It went to Harrison Hadley, down to the Bowery in New York, to the Calvary Mission. It went to Roland Hazard, to Carl Jung, back to Roland Hazard, up to Vermont, to Siebert Graves, and Shep Cornell, and now to Ebby Thatcher. So they took Ebby back to New York, is what they did, and they put him out on the street corner to preach and to convert people. And one of the first people that Ebby Thatcher started to think about was our founder, Bill Wilson. His old friend, Bill. So Ebby decides that he's gonna go over and visit his friend Bill, so he goes over to Bill's house, and they're sitting across the kitchen table from each other. And Bill could see that there was something different about his friend Ebby. Ebby sat there and told Bill, he said, Bill, I got religion. Bill sat there and thought to himself, now I'm glad you got religion. I got more gin, buddy, and my gin's gonna outlast your religion. But it says it in the book that Ebby Thatcher flatly proclaimed to Bill Wilson what came to be our 12th promise that we read in a lot of meetings today. What Ebby Thatcher said was that God was doing for him what he could not do for himself. God was doing for him what he could not do for himself. So Bill, even though he's drunk at the time, he decides that he's going to go back one more time. So he goes back to Towns Hospital, where he claims he was 4 times. Ray O, a friend of mine out of Florida, archivist and history buff and Alcoholics Anonymous, claims that he got to see the records for Towns Hospital, and he claims that Bill Wilson was in there 14 times. So I really don't know how many times Bill Wilson was in Towns Hospital. I know that it was a number of times. So Bill goes back to Towns Hospital, and he has his white flash experience, and he gets sober. And he's got to give this thing away, and I'm not going to go through all the leading up to it, guys, but he's sober for a few weeks or whatever it may have been. He's going down to the Bowery of New York. He's trying to drag people off bar stools, trying to get them sober for some reason. For some reason, Bill knew that the key for him to stay sober. He had the information. Dr. Silkworth, the doctor who had worked with thousands of alcoholics. The last time that Bill was in Towns Hospital, pronounced him to his wife Lois the same thing that Carl Jung had said to Roland Hadley. The last time that Bill was in Towns Hospital, Dr. Silkworth took Bill and Lois aside. He was talking to Lois, and he said, you know, there's nothing we can do for your husband. He's going to die in a short period of time, and he's going to be committed to the state mental institution for an undetermined amount of time. No human power can relieve his alcoholism. So Bill had what was required in this program, guys, at the bottom. The bottom and depth is the first condition of sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So Bill's sober. He's had his white flash experience. He's going down the Bowery of New York. He's dragging people off bar stools, trying to get him sober. He's not having any success. He's not having any success. And the time came during that first 6 months before Bill met Dr. Bob in May of 1935. Bill's sobriety date is the first part of December 11th, 1934. We celebrate June 10th, 1935 as Founders Day because that's the day that Dr. Bob took his last drink, and then there were 2. But Bill was dragging people off bar stools. He was trying to get them sober. He wasn't having any success. And he went home and he was talking to his wife Lois, and I'm here to tell you that everybody is in this room this evening, sobriety was hindered from what was about to be said. 3 most important words in all Alcoholics Anonymous ever uttered were about to be uttered right then. And they weren't even uttered by an alcoholic, because Bill came home and he was tired. He was exhausted. He was frustrated. He was talking to his wife Lois, and he said, you know, we've done everything. We've drugged people home. We've fed them. We've given them money. We've done everything with your meager earnings. And not one person has stayed sober. I'm here to tell you that everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous sobriety was hinging right then on what she said. But she looked him in the eye and she said, you do, Bill. You do, Bill. That's important, guys. That's damn important. So Bill's 6 months sober now. He's down back in Wall Street. This company that he is working with decides that they're going to send him to Akron on a business trip. He goes to Akron. He meets Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob gets drunk one more time, and then he gets sober, and Alcoholics Anonymous is formed. They go out and they 12-step Bill Dodson. They didn't really know what they were doing at the time, but they got a couple other people sober as well. And after 6 months, Bill, he goes back to New York, and he gets a couple of people sober. And one of the people that Bill was able to work with when he went back to New York was a fellow by the name of Hank P. Hank Parker. Hank P. was a big shot. He could not stay sober. He could not put any time together at all, but he was a big shot. He was a big promoter. The big book was actually Hank's idea. He figured that they had to pass this thing on through literature, so he told Bill one day to write his message. But if you read the big book, there's a portion in the big book that's talking, I think it's Dr. Silkworth. He says that about a year ago he met a man who later he couldn't recognize. That's Hank P. that he's talking about, Hank Parker. But Hank P. could not get sober. But the big book was actually his idea. He told Bill one day to write a story, right? There was a solution. That was actually the beginning of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what they did was in 1938, they took a head count and they counted 40 people. 40 people had gotten sober and had maintained sobriety during this period of time. And they were sitting around a table in Akron, very similar to this meeting here tonight. And they were talking about how are we going to pass this thing on? How are we going to carry this message? If we keep doing it the way we're doing it, it'll be 10 years before it gets out of Akron. It'll be 10 years before we get out of Akron. So Bill, he's the big shot. He's the stockbroker with the law degree. He's a great promoter. Bill wanted to have a group of paid emissaries to go across the country. Bill also wanted to have a string of hospitals. He also wanted to name it the Bill Wilson Movement. And he also wanted to write a book, which was Hank P.'s brainchild. And the group conscience is starting to be formed or take effect anyway. And they nixed the idea of a string of hospitals. And they nixed the idea of paid emissaries. But they gave Bill the okay to write this book. Now, I'm a man that I believe that God answers our prayers, but that we don't always get the answer that we want. After having done the research that I've done, my work in Alcoholics Anonymous, collecting archives and different things, studying the history, it's very apparent to me, guys, that our big book in this program is a gift to us of answered prayers. But God wasn't always saying yes. I believe that God said no through the group conscience to the paid emissaries. And I believe that God said no through the group conscience to the string of hospitals. But Dr. Silkworth had a friend at Reader's Digest. And so they took Bill, they went to Reader's Digest. Bill had written his story by now. That's the first thing we do as alcoholics is talk about ourselves first. But Bill had written his story, and they took his story to Reader's Digest, and Reader's Digest read it, and they said, man, this is great stuff. We'd love to print a condensed version of this once you guys get the book written. So they left Reader's Digest with great hopes. They were very excited. This was going to be a nationally exposed book. They had it going on. So Bill goes back and he starts writing a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And everything that he's writing is being edited and being critiqued and being changed by the membership itself. If you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a lot of we's and r's, and it's a we program, that type of stuff. But that wasn't the way that the big book was originally written in the original manuscript. If you read the original manuscript, there's a lot of yous and you must and you better do this. And if you get to this part of the book and don't agree with what we're saying, just throw the book in the trash. There's that type of stuff in there. But they were critiquing him. They were changing him. They were making him edit everything that he was writing. And it was frustrating to Bill. And I want to read you something that we read in every meeting out of chapter 5. About the style of the writing back then when they were making him change everything and critiquing him. It says this, that some of these we bought. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we did not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go. Absolutely. That was the style of the writing, guys, because they were critiquing him and they were making him change everything that he was writing. It was becoming frustrating to Bill. And so after he wrote that, and after he wrote the 12 steps, Bill, in his frustration, went back to the group and he said, I will not be passing this in front of every one of you to edit and to change this entire book. Either I write it or you write it. So they got together and they made the decision, okay, Bill, go ahead and write the book. And I want to read you something out of that very same chapter after that decision was made. It says this: we hope that you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you from him. If you have already made a decision and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. That's the difference in the writing style between the first 5 chapters and the rest of the book. So we have the book being written. We've gone to Reader's Digest, but we need some money. We need some money. Bill Wilson and Hank Parkhurst are both great salesmen and great promoters. They kind of remind me of our friend Perry on the night they go to selling cookies and cakes and pies down here at the local alumni club. But we've got another event that's coming up here shortly. But Bill Wilson and Hank Parkhurst are both great salesmen. These two guys can sell Playboy to a blind man. So they decide that they're going to form the 100 Men Corporation and they're going to sell stock. This is a copy of the stock prospectus that they were selling. $25 a share, par value in Alcoholics Anonymous, in a corporation that never existed. A corporation that never existed. I'm not sure how legal that was. But anyway, so they sold all this stuff. They got some money together. They got the book completed. They go back to Reader's Digest and they said, here it is, man, we're ready to go. We sold stock in a corporation that doesn't exist. We borrowed money from here and there. We formed our own publishing company. We published the book ourselves. Cornwell Press went into them for however much money. And this is the book that came out. This is the first printing of the first edition of Alcoholics Anonymous. It came out in April of 1939. It's a beautiful book, guys. Bright red, hardboard cover, gold gilt lettering, if you can find one with the gilt lettering. This is what the big book looked like when it came out in April of 1939. This is what the big book looks like in June of 2024. It's still a beautiful book, guys. The hardboard covers are now made to look exactly like the dust jacket used to look. Alcoholics are masters at making things look like what they're not. This is what the big book looks like in June of 2024. And I know I don't need to say this to any of these District 33 Tuolumne County alcoholics, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is what the big book looks like open. That's some really useful information, guys. Really useful information. So they go back to Reader's Digest. They have the book completed. Reader's Digest says, hey, guys, we're sorry. We've decided we're not going to print the article. So here we are. We're a small group of disappointed alcoholics. But we're not just a small group of disappointed alcoholics. We're stuck. We're stuck with, I've heard different numbers. My research is 4,650 copies of that red book. 4,650 copies of that red book. What we have now, guys, is a small group of disappointed alcoholics sitting on 4,650 copies of that red book, and we can't do anything with them. As no one knows about Alcoholics Anonymous. These books are all in case boxes sitting in a small closet in a tiny little rundown office in downtown New York City. What I'll be doing right here, guys, is I'm going to be ending part 1 of this two-part workshop. I'll be happy to tell you what happens to that small group of disappointed alcoholics and those 4,650 copies of that red book. And I will be doing that on Monday, July 22nd, 2024, in this room. Sue H., who is a good friend of mine, I occasionally ask her a question and make a suggestion to her. Sometimes she'll say to me, let me ponder. Let me ponder. What I'd like to do is I'd like to leave everybody with a couple of things to ponder about during this next month, between this workshop and the next workshop. First thing I'd like you guys to think about, out of that small group of disappointed alcoholics, the most sobriety that anyone in that group had was a little over 4.5 years. A little over 4.5 years. The second thing that I'd like for you guys to think about, ponder during this month and between these workshops, just how grateful are we, or should we be, that small group of disappointed alcoholics didn't just throw up their hands and walk away from this thing and give up. I'd like to now turn the rest of the meeting over to the lady that cracked the whip and got the workshop going for us, our 420 workshop coordinator, Kathy.
All right.